President Donald Trump delivered an ultimatum to Ottawa in the spring of 2025 that completely shattered the modern geopolitical order. President Donald Trump sent Canada a bill for $71 billion. The demand was absolutely explicit. Canada pays $71 billion to be protected by the new Golden Dome space and missile defense system, or Canada functionally becomes the 51st state of the United States of America. Mainstream television networks like the Cable News Network and the Fox News Channel are broadcasting this event as a brilliant masterstroke of the America First political agenda. They continually portray this massive bill as Washington finally forcing a quiet northern ally to open its wallet and pay for its own security. I am stepping in right now to show you the absolute reality hiding deep behind those loud daily broadcasts. You are being told a simple story about American economic dominance and political strength. The actual truth is a complex story about the single most expensive strategic miscalculation in the entire history of North American military defense. President Donald Trump is aggressively demanding payment for a defense architecture that officially costs $175 billion on paper, but his current administration missed a completely fatal detail in their aggressive calculation. The United States of America does not actually control the core physical foundation that the Golden Dome desperately requires to function. Canada controls it. Prime Minister Mark Carney is quietly sitting on the exact geographic and technological monopoly that makes the entire American space shield possible. The Golden Dome is completely blind without the over-the-horizon radar early warning network located deep inside the frozen Canadian Arctic. Without unrestricted access to that sovereign Canadian territory, the multi-billion-dollar American defense system instantly fails. Washington is loudly demanding a $71 billion down payment for a brand new, highly advanced vehicle. But Ottawa legally owns the only structural road that specific vehicle can ever drive on, and the Canadian government just decided to start charging a massive toll. In the early months of 2025, the administration of President Donald Trump proudly unveiled the baseline projection for the Golden Dome missile defense architecture. The official price tag stood at $175 billion. That specific number was broadcast across the globe as a massive but necessary investment in continental security. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning on a quiet day in May of 2025, the Congressional Budget Office released its independent assessment of the exact same defense system. The nonpartisan fiscal analysts found something absolutely terrifying hidden inside the blueprints. The space-based intercept layer of the Golden Dome, which is just a single component of the entire architecture, would actually cost $542 billion over the next 2 decades. Washington faced an immediate and catastrophic funding gap. The administration needed foreign capital to plug that massive hole. President Donald Trump immediately turned his sights northward to extract that capital. He initiated a brutal and rapid sequence of economic pressure. Washington slammed a 35% tariff on goods entering the United States of America from across the northern border. Washington delivered the aggressive ultimatum demanding $71 billion in direct defense contributions. Washington presented this extreme demand not as a diplomatic negotiation, but as an absolute binary choice for sovereign survival. You need to look closely at the exact contrast in leadership styles during this precise historical moment. President Donald Trump operates through overwhelming volume. He uses public ultimatums. He uses raw economic leverage to force immediate compliance. He completely dominates the daily news cycle to pressure his closest allies. Prime Minister Mark Carney operates entirely in the shadows. He did not go on national television to deliver angry speeches about American bullying. He did not post furious messages on social media platforms. He maintained absolute public silence while he executed a completely different and far more dangerous strategy. In March of 2026, Prime Minister Mark Carney boarded a plane and flew directly to Yellowknife in the deep Canadian north. He stood in the freezing Arctic territory and calmly signed a comprehensive military infrastructure modernization package. The total cost of that package was exactly $87 billion. The Canadian government committed $87 billion to completely rebuild the radar outposts, expand the forward operating bases, and modernize the entire sensor network stretching across the polar ice. This is the exact sensor network the Golden Dome must plug into to track incoming hypersonic threats. Prime Minister Mark Carney did not ask Washington for permission to build it. He did not offer Washington joint ownership of the new technology. He simply built it under strict sovereign Canadian control. Washington used brutal tariffs. Washington used public ultimatums. Washington used military pressure. Ottawa used cold mathematics. The entire calculus of North American defense fractured right at that precise moment. The country being billed $71 billion for an American shield was simultaneously spending $87 billion to build the eyes that the American shield requires to see. The geopolitical leverage completely flipped overnight. We need to completely step away from the political theater happening right now in Washington and look directly at the historical foundation of continental security. You must ignore the daily press briefings. You must look at a physical globe. In the year 1958, the United States of America and Canada established the North American Aerospace Defense Command. The mainstream media constantly frames this military alliance as a generous American charity program that shields a weaker northern neighbor. That framing is completely false. The North American Aerospace Defense Command is a legally co-equal military partnership. Canadian generals and American generals share identical command authority inside the highly secured bunkers at Peterson Space Force Base in the state of Colorado. The partnership is bound by a strict international treaty. The partnership is bound by shared military intelligence. The partnership is bound by mutual continental survival. The administration of President Donald Trump views this military relationship as a landlord dealing with a tenant who refuses to pay rent. But military strategy does not care about political analogies. Military strategy cares about physical geography. The Earth is a sphere. The shortest possible flight path for an intercontinental ballistic missile or an advanced hypersonic glide vehicle launched from the Russian Federation or the People's Republic of China, targeting the United States of America, arches directly over the North Pole. Those advanced weapons do not fly over the Pacific Ocean. Those advanced weapons do not fly over the Atlantic Ocean. Those advanced weapons fly straight through the frozen sovereign airspace of Canada. This geographic reality dictates the absolute baseline valuation of North American geopolitical assets. The Golden Dome is engineered to be the most advanced defense architecture in human history. But a missile interceptor sitting in the state of Alaska or the state of California cannot simply launch itself into the dark. It requires early warning. It requires persistent tracking. It requires the over-the-horizon radar networks permanently positioned on the frozen tundra of Baffin Island and stretching across the entire Canadian Arctic. If you remove the northern Canadian radar coverage from the operational equation, the defensive capability of the Golden Dome collapses. The intercept window for a hypersonic weapon traveling faster than Mach 5 is measured in minutes. The further north you detect the incoming threat, the longer the United States of America has to calculate the trajectory and launch the interceptors. If the United States of America loses access to the Canadian Arctic sensors, that critical intercept window instantly shrinks from several minutes down to a few terrifying seconds. The loss of that specific geographic advantage means the United States of America would need to buy thousands of additional interceptor missiles just to compensate for the massive reduction in early warning time. The $542 billion price tag for the space layer of the Golden Dome would immediately double. A defensive system lacking its primary northern sensor network transforms from a state-of-the-art shield into a massive pile of slow-reacting scrap metal. Canada is not hiding behind the American shield. Canada is actively holding the shield up. The Arctic territory is an irreplaceable strategic asset. You cannot replicate it with satellites. You cannot replicate it with offshore ships. You cannot replicate it by throwing more money at defense contractors in the state of Virginia or the state of Texas. The Golden Dome requires the Canadian land. The Golden Dome requires the Canadian airspace. The Golden Dome requires the Canadian radar. The political administration in Washington is treating geography like a cheap commodity that can be bullied into submission. They fundamentally misunderstand the asset valuation of the modern battlefield. Prime Minister Mark Carney understands this valuation perfectly. He knows that his country controls the exact physical real estate that the entire American survival plan depends on. The United States of America is demanding Canada pay $71 billion to be protected, while Canada is spending $87 billion to build the exact eyes for that protection system. The truth is, the United States of America is the one who owes the money. The administration of President Donald Trump swung a massive economic hammer at the northern border in the early months of 2026. They imposed a crippling 35% tariff on Canadian goods. They delivered a $71 billion bill. They expected immediate and total capitulation. But the heavy hammer did not crush the Canadian government. The heavy hammer operated exactly like a boomerang. It is swinging right back to shatter the American defense industrial base. You are watching the absolute end of North American strategic dependence. For decades, the Canadian military effectively acted as a quiet subsidiary of the American defense ecosystem. When Ottawa needed fighter jets, they bought American. When Ottawa needed missile interceptors, they bought American. When Ottawa needed radar components, they bought American. The administration in Washington calculated that this historical dependency would force Prime Minister Mark Carney to fold under intense economic pressure. That calculation was completely wrong. The heavy tariffs and the aggressive public ultimatums did not break Canadian resolve. They acted as the ultimate catalyst for complete strategic autonomy. I am going to show you the exact financial receipts. Look very closely at where the massive $87 billion Canadian modernization budget is actually flowing right now in the middle of 2026. The capital is not flowing south to the state of Maryland or the state of Virginia. The capital is deliberately flowing inward and flowing across the Atlantic Ocean. Prime Minister Mark Carney is aggressively shifting capital allocation toward domestic Canadian defense contractors. Massive military simulation and training contracts are going directly to CAE Incorporated. Complex aerospace structural manufacturing is going directly to Magellan Aerospace Corporation. He is deliberately starving the American prime contractors and aggressively feeding his own domestic industrial base. But the boomerang effect goes much deeper than domestic spending. The Canadian government officially joined the European Union Security Action for Europe initiative in February of 2026. They are formalizing massive new procurement partnerships with European defense giants. Saab Aktiebolag, BAE Systems Public Limited Company, and Airbus Defence and Space are now aggressively competing for Canadian military contracts. Those lucrative contracts historically defaulted entirely to Lockheed Martin Corporation and Raytheon Technologies Corporation. The United States of America weaponized its economic leverage to extract money. Canada weaponized its sovereign infrastructure to destroy the American defense monopoly. You must look at the private investor communications from the largest American defense corporations to understand the true financial panic happening right now. The executives at Lockheed Martin Corporation and Raytheon Technologies Corporation are not talking about the massive profits of the Golden Dome on their private quarterly earnings calls. They are quietly warning their institutional investors about severe completion risk. Completion risk is the exact financial term for a project that might never be finished because a critical component is entirely missing. That critical component is the Canadian radar network. The American defense contractors know the truth. If the political relationship with Ottawa completely collapses, the American military cannot legally access the Northern Sensor data. If they cannot access the Northern Sensor data, the Golden Dome fails its operational testing requirements. If the Golden Dome fails its operational testing requirements, the American government cancels the massive production contracts. Washington used economic warfare. Washington used political blackmail. Washington used media intimidation. But Ottawa used transactional pragmatism. Prime Minister Mark Carney took the $71 billion threat and converted it into a strict mandate to rebuild his own military independence. He is legally locking the United States of America out of the exact defense procurement surge that Washington originally demanded. The American defense contractors are losing billions of dollars in future revenue because the administration of President Donald Trump fundamentally misunderstood who held the actual leverage. The American strategy backfired completely. You might believe a snow-covered radar station sitting isolated on Baffin Island has absolutely nothing to do with your daily life. You need to open your banking application right now and look at your available balance. The macroeconomic shockwaves from this geopolitical standoff are heading straight for your personal wallet. The Canada-United States-Mexico agreement is facing a complete and total collapse in July of 2026. The mainstream media is treating this as a boring, bureaucratic trade dispute. You need to understand this is an active economic crisis. When the political relationship fractures over defense funding, the cross-border supply chains instantly snap. The vehicles manufactured by the Ford Motor Company and the General Motors Company cross that northern border multiple times before they ever reach a dealership. When those supply chains break under the weight of 35% tariffs, the price of your next family vehicle skyrockets. The energy sector pumping crude oil out of the province of Alberta gets completely bottlenecked. The price of gasoline you pump into your car immediately surges, but the economic devastation hits your retirement savings even harder. If the United States of America cannot access the Canadian radar network, the budget for the Golden Dome program mathematically explodes. The federal government will be forced to burn through hundreds of billions of additional tax dollars just to compensate for the blind spots in the northern sky. That massive inflation of the defense budget directly drains funding from public services and domestic infrastructure. You must look at your retirement portfolio. Your pension fund is heavily invested in the major American defense contractors. When those defense corporations face massive schedule delays and severe completion risks because they cannot access sovereign Canadian territory, their profit margins completely collapse. Institutional investors will panic. Their corporate stock prices will plummet. Your personal life savings will evaporate simply because the administration of President Donald Trump miscalculated the leverage of a northern ally. Washington is playing a highly dangerous game of geopolitical poker with the northern border. Washington is using heavy tariffs. Washington is using public ultimatums. Washington is using military threats. They are not gambling with political capital. That is not government money. That is your money. We are standing at the absolute edge of a geopolitical cliff in the middle of 2026. The decisions made inside the Oval Office over the next 72 hours will lock in one of three exact scenarios for the future of North American survival. The first scenario is the quiet reversal. The administration of President Donald Trump and the government of Prime Minister Mark Carney reach a completely silent financial offset. Washington quietly accepts the $87 billion Canadian Arctic infrastructure modernization as the full and complete payment for the Golden Dome defense system. The Canada-United States-Mexico agreement gets officially extended before the critical July deadline. Both national leaders save political face in front of their citizens. The major defense contractors breathe a massive sigh of relief. This is the exact financial outcome the institutional investors on Wall Street are desperately praying for right now. The second scenario is the expensive fragmentation. The intense trade negotiations completely stall. The devastating 35% tariffs remain permanently locked in place across the northern border. The Canadian government strictly denies American military access to all newly constructed northern radar facilities. The Golden Dome program instantly transforms into a massive financial black hole. The project swallows hundreds of billions of American tax dollars while leaving a fatal operational blind spot directly over the North Pole. The integrated defense industrial base fractures. The security of the continent degrades. The American taxpayer pays the ultimate price. The third scenario is the absolute geopolitical nightmare. The Canadian government officially commercializes its own sovereign geography. Prime Minister Mark Carney steps up to the global negotiating table and demands the United States of America pay a massive annual subscription fee just to access the critical Arctic airspace. Canada weaponizes its frozen land. Canada weaponizes its strategic location. Canada forces a complete and total repricing of the entire global military order. The historical dynamic where the American superpower demands financial tribute from a smaller northern ally completely inverts overnight. The greatness of a global superpower does not come from the massive bills it prints. The greatness of a global superpower does not come from the aggressive ultimatums it broadcasts. The greatness of a global superpower comes from knowing exactly who is actually holding up the sky above its head. You need to look deeply at the changing power structures around you. How many billions of dollars is a single frozen coordinate inside the Arctic Circle actually worth when continental survival is strictly on the line? And is the United States of America completely destroying its own critical security lifeline simply because the political leadership failed a basic asset valuation equation? Leave your exact thoughts down in the comment section below, because this financial war has only just begun.